Everybody seen? All right. Are you seeing my screen? I'll
Yes.
double check. Thank you for that.
All right.
All right.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Incorporating Undergraduate Students into OER Review. Our speaker today is Dr. Medora Huseby from Colorado State University. She's the associate professor in the Department of Microbiology, Immunology, and Pathology. Today, Medora will be sharing experience and tips and tricks for incorporating undergraduate students into OER review. If you are enjoying this webinar by watching the recording, please do feel free to reach out at oerdhe.state.co.us or directly to Medora with any follow-up questions. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Medora now.
Hey, thank you so much, Chelsea. So my discussion today, or my talk today, is about incorporating undergraduate students into the OER review process. And I'm going to give you some background about why I'm doing this. Then I'm going to talk about how I've done this and then the context that I think this works well in. And I'll show you some data I've collected from my students and then talk about some possible modifications and future directions. So we know that OER is best. So OER is best for students because it's going to increase accessibility to their learning. We know that it lowers the financial burden of higher education, and these two things go hand in hand. And so having students being able to access the OER, those openly available resources on day one of class is huge, rather than waiting for financial aid or waiting for something else to fall into place. And we also know that use of OER does lead to improved student outcomes. There's been studies showing that it increases grade average in a class, and it's especially noticeable when you talk about it between Pell Grant recipients and non-Pell Grant recipients. It also has been shown to decrease the drop-fail withdrawal rate for students that have access to OER compared to those that are using a traditional textbook. So we know that OER is the best practice for students. It's also a best practice for instructors. And so with instructors, it increases collaboration, it increases sharing. There's a lot of flexibility to adapt or personalize that material to the course. You are not locked into one textbook when only maybe a third of that textbook is actually a good fit for you. You can most certainly expand beyond that. And it's also, I have improved student equity under the instruction category, because when our students are doing better, it's that should be the goal when we're teaching. So I really do think this is good for students, good for instructors. And we also know that there do remain barriers. So for students, a big barrier is awareness about OER and then access to OER. And so if they're unfamiliar, especially if their institution doesn't highlight it, or if their instructors don't use it, they just might not know that other options beyond high-priced textbooks exist. For students, issue with OER can be inconsistent formatting. There's something to be said about having standardization that you see with a textbook. So that can be a struggle for some students. Offline version availability. So if the instructor is relying on OER and that OER is only available online, or you can't get to a PDF easily offline, that can be a tricky situation. And students do have quality concerns. So what is the rigor of how this OER was created? How was it double checked? Is the material up to date, right? All of that can be a concern for students. With instructors, I think some of the big concerns that pop into my head when I think about OER are ancillary materials. So it's nice when somebody else has already made all of those, and it can be tough to make these. There's just time and support to either adapt, adopt, or create. Our hearts can be in the right place. We can want to use OER, but if we're not supported in that transition period to using OER, I think a lot of people either don't have time to make that complete conversion or have to kind of wade into the gray areas where you might be using some copyrighted material more than you should, all while trying to get over to OER. There's sustainability challenges. How do you know when that OER was updated? If it's your OER, how do you have time to make sure it's current and up to date? And then editing of OER I have on here as well. Speaking as somebody who has created OER, it is a challenge to find somebody to read it and to edit it. But it's an important part in that creation process. Housing of OER is an issue. Where are you going to house it? Where will it be stored? Where will it be accessible? And then one that I think about a lot and one that I really want to highlight today is peer review. And so we know that the articles, at least I'll speak for myself, I teach microbiology and I teach cell biology, and I want the material that I'm using to have been rigorously peer reviewed. And that can be a challenge when we're using OER. So with peer review and OER, there's lots of places that people can house their OER, but there's only a few repositories that do offer a peer review process for this OER. OER that is peer reviewed, I have down here, and that's OpenStax and Open Textbook Library. Those ones are peer reviewed. I feel very comfortable going to either of those sources to try to find a good fit for my courses. But and those would be good if you want to use a textbook and really commit to that for your course. But if you want to do something a little differently, if you want to pull a chapter here, pull a chapter there, pull material from somebody else, use a website somewhere else, that's where I think it gets tricky with trying to figure out where the quality control is with OER. And so individual OER creations, they can sometimes be peer reviewed, but this peer review process, there's a lot of inconsistencies within it. The standardizations, like using a rubric, are not immediately accessible if you're just looking at the product. You don't know how it was peer reviewed or how many times it was peer reviewed. And so it can be tricky when you're looking at an individual's product for OER. Now, I mentioned before, there are a few OER repositories that offer a peer review process. And the one that I'm going to focus on today is Merlot. And I'll go through that in a minute. And so Merlot does offer peer review for some of the OER that is deposited there. These materials are peer reviewed based on volunteer hours. And it's important to note that not all of the material that's on there is peer reviewed. There's simply not enough, there's too much material and not enough volunteers to fully peer review it. The way that the process works with Merlot is that it has to pass an initial quality check and it gets triaged. And if it meets a high enough threshold, then it gets put into the queue to be peer reviewed. But again, you're waiting for volunteers to have time to go through and peer review that. So some high quality materials can languish for quite a while, just waiting for somebody with the expertise and the time to take a look at it. Merlot does rely on community voting as well. They have a star system and you can use half to 5 stars and you can do half star increments. And so the people at Merlot say, well, the cream floats to the top. So if a lot of users are really liking this, they'll give it a higher rating, and then that'll impact how people can access it or find it. And that has issues because just because something is something that you like doesn't, as a community member, doesn't mean that it has a rigorous peer review behind it, or that somebody is fact checking, or somebody is making certain that the science is current and accurate. So it's tricky to just rely on the community voting system. And what I do like about Merlot is that they have both for the materials that have been peer reviewed. So a little bit more about Merlot. This is a screenshot of it. Sorry, I skipped a slide there. Okay. So Merlot is a repository. It stands for Multimedia Education Resource and Learning and Online Teaching. And I have a screenshot here. I believe it's very easy to sign up for this. There's lots of members, and once you become a member, then you're able to start to upload your materials. And again, those materials will go through the triage process. Chelsea.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're seeing our slide changing.
Oh,
So I think we just
try again.
realized as we were moving, and realized like that, yeah, there was definitely a screenshot.
Okay. Can you see
There,
it now?
that we can see that one, yes.
Okay, sorry about
Do you
that.
want to toggle forward just to make sure we'll be able to capture the change and we don't have to interrupt you one more time? Perfect. Okay, let's go back and then we're good. Thank you, Medora. Sorry about that
Okay.
technical difficulty.
Yeah.
And we can also share the
Oh,
slides with attendees too, for anyone who needs.
okay. So just if you were curious, there were slides beforehand. I do think I went through all of the points. So, all right. Okay. So now we're going to talk about Merlot. And like I said, this is multimedia education resource for learning and online teaching. It is a repository. It has quite a few registered members when I took that screenshot. And once you're a registered member, you do have the option to upload your materials that you have created. It doesn't have to be something you created. It could be something else you found that you think is interesting and open and should be housed in this area. So it's not just textbook chapters or anything. It is also websites or tutorials or there's just a lot of different options for what you can find and upload to Merlot. So a lot of these are OER materials for educators. They do get submitted by the community, like I said. And once it's submitted, those materials do get reviewed by board members for suitability. And they can be suitable, but not deemed high enough quality to be put into the peer review triage process. And if they are high quality, then they get a higher rating, and then peer reviewers are supposed to look at them sooner. But like I said, they can wait for quite a while before somebody has time to do that. Many of the materials do undergo more of a rigorous peer review, so it's not just the community rating that you see for this. And when they do go under peer review, they do have two peer reviews that are going to assess that, and then those comments will be combined. Some of the comments are just shared with the author or who submitted it. Other comments are made public so that anybody who's looking through this material can see the reviewer's comments on the material. All right. So how does that work? Um, so if you're going to be a peer reviewer for Merlot, you do have to go through a process to make sure that you have the correct qualifications. They do ask that you're an expert in the scholarship of the field. They do want you to have demonstrated excellence in teaching, which means that they want you to have a track record of teaching and using educational materials. They prefer that you have experience using technology in teaching and learning. I asked what that was, and they were pretty vague. So I don't know, we're all on Zoom. I think we have that experience, right? They do prefer that you have connections to professional organizations in the discipline. And then you do have to go through a training process where they assign you material to review, and then somebody is going to go through how you reviewed it and make sure that you're understanding the process. In addition, peer reviewers are joined the discipline specific editorial boards. And so for me, I'm on the biology editorial board. And what that means is that we meet once a month, get updates from Merlot, and then just make sure that we're still being part of this community. And the screenshot that I have that I'm sharing kind of shows you what it looks like when you're going through Merlot when you're trying to find material. And so I have microscope basics here, and there's an option for everybody to rate it. And then you can see that there's the peer reviewer rating. So that's based on stars. And then there's also the user rating. And so that's just based on how people in the community are thinking about this material. But I do think the more important one is going to be the peer review portion of this. Now, when people are peer reviewing for Merlot, they do give a very standard rubric. This is used for all the different disciplines. So it doesn't matter if you're reviewing for sociology, psychology, history, or microbiology. This is the rubric that you're going to use. And this rubric has several different categories. It starts with the description. It goes through quality of content, potential effectiveness as a teaching tool, and then ease of use. And each of these are going to have subcategories. And then the person who is doing the peer review would go ahead and add their decisions on the different categories. Here, you tally up your numbers, get a total, and then kind of divide it at the end to get your ranking, which is going to be between, again, 0 to 5, and 5 being the highest. And then you're supposed to list strengths of the material, and then you also list any concerns that you might have. And if you're not giving material 5, then you need to kind of explain why, and which I think is good. Like, why doesn't this material deserve a 5? Where could it be improved? I think it is valuable feedback for the submitters of the material. Okay. Did anybody have questions about Merlot or about peer review of OER so far? Feel free to interrupt me if those questions do pop up. Otherwise, I will reserve time at the end of the session as well. So I'm going to change topics real quick, and I'm going to tell you about capstone students, because capstone students are the students that I'm asking to serve as peer reviewers. So with capstone courses, traditionally these courses have a really small class size, and I can tell you that my capstone courses are capped at 12 students. And because they are small, this really gives the instructor and the student a lot of time to work together and to develop a bigger, more impactful project than, say, that students might have been involved with when they're taking a 200 level class with 80 other students. The other thing about these capstones is that there's typically there's several offerings of capstones, so it's not just one offering that all students must take and it's a required course. These courses, there's a lot of different topics, at least offered at CSU, and students can really tailor what they're interested in to the capstone that they want to do. And I will also say students are not required to do capstones at CSU. They can instead do a research project or do extra laboratory learning in lieu of a capstone. So there's flexibility. But the students who do choose to do the capstones, typically they're known already to the instructors. So their strengths, their capabilities, their interests, they're already known quantities. As far as the students go, typically they're going to be second semester seniors. So these students are ready to graduate, and they're rounding out their education with their capstone course. They tend to be pretty motivated students. I know there's always senioritis, and that definitely is a thing, but the students that tend to work with me on capstones, they're motivated because they need to enhance their CV. And they want to enhance their CV either for the job market or for going to professional schools. But they're looking for ways to be both impactful and also to be able to track that and say and show future employers or future schools that they are involved. They also tend to have strong internal motivation. And when I talk about their internal motivation, they're genuinely motivated to give back at this point. I think that attending college for 3.5 years can feel not selfish, but definitely self-involved. Like, you're really focused on themselves and how they're going to set themselves up for the future, rather than more of an outward-looking view about, well, how can I now use my expertise to help others? And so I think by the time they get to this point in their academic career, they're starting to feel a little bit of, I'm ready to give back, I'm ready to help, and I'm ready to share. And so I find they do really want to give back and contribute, but oftentimes they just don't know how. They don't know where to start. They lack mechanisms for even knowing what's available. They don't have the networks, they don't have the connections, and they don't know where the opportunities are for how they can share what they've done so far. And so enter the class, the capstone that I teach. And the specific class is MIP 400G. As Chelsea told you before, I'm in the microbiology, immunology, and pathology department. So that's what MIP stands for. 400, that's what in the 400s, that's where we give our capstones. And then G, I think our capstones go like all the way to Z. I think it's wild how many they offer, not all at once, but there's a lot of different capstones. But the one I teach is G. So it's an upper division course. I told you that it's capped at 12 students. And with this course, it's worth 2 credits. We meet once a week. I do expect the students to spend a lot of their time outside of the classroom, either preparing for or performing their service learning. So that's why we only meet once a week. And I do ask students to come in and meet with me so I can explain the unique requirements of a service learning course before they commit and enroll and then realize that the flexibility required for their schedule or how they have to transport themselves to different events or how they're expected to be at CSU at non-traditional times. I don't want that to be a surprise to anybody. So I do have them meet with me to go over the expectations. So we do service learning, and I'm showing a picture of how we recruit students to 400G and service learning. I'll get into that in a minute, but what they're doing in this particular instance is they took microscopes and they took swabs and they took slides to a middle school, and they let the students swab their gum line, made a smear of it on the slide, and then we stained it. And then they got to let the students look through the microscope and see all the bacteria that live in their gums. And that's what you're seeing in the image below. So this kid is looking at his oral microbiota. And so this is nice because it's combining microbiology with outreach to the community. And so this is kind of what our service learning, or not kind of, this is what our service learning really focuses on. And so students are interested in this aspect. They're ready to share their passion and enthusiasm and their expertise with other people. With service learning, I think service learning is kind of a broad thing, and I think it can be taken a lot of different ways. But the goal with service learning is really to connect classroom instruction with meaningful service projects. So I really want to take these 3.5 years, sometimes longer, of theoretical microbiology knowledge that these students have really been working so hard at. And I want them to be able to take that, convert it into something that they can do with another audience. So not a peer, not an instructor, but instead somebody else in the broader community, and then get that type of civic engagement and involvement and broadening just the audience about who they can communicate their scientific knowledge to. So goals are get real world experience, strengthen our ties with our community, practice their civic involvement, and then again, move from the theoretical academic portion, which they've really focused on, into something more hands-on that they can do. And so it gets, like I said, you can define service learning a lot of different ways. And in this class, I try to, and I'll show you this in a future slide, but I really try to work to look at it 2 different ways. And the way that I define service is both with a community lens and then with an academic lens. And so the service with community, sometimes the students will choose to volunteer. They might volunteer to host a science night. They might volunteer to coach a Odyssey of the Minds team, right? There's lots of ways that they can volunteer and get involved. They also will serve as judges. They'll go to science fairs and be judges. And then there's also the engagement aspect too. And with the engagement, that's kind of what this image is showing you. So this image is showing you the students engaged at a science night. So this is at Rice Elementary School. They have between 600 to 800 students with their families come through. And then my students are there to try to help them. Again, this is the swab exercise where everybody gets to look through a microscope and see what is living in their oral microbiota. And it's kind of fun. It really reveals to people who think germs are cool and who think they need to brush their teeth better. And then this event kind of accumulates where we get to take selfies. And that's where they take pictures of their cells through the microscope. So that's the service part of it, the community part of the service. But there's also an academic slant to service as well. And I think a lot of us are familiar with this. And this is where the peer review portion of this would come into play, right? Serving as a peer reviewer is definitely an academic service that I am expected to provide as part of my role as a faculty member at CSU. This also is committee work, and this is also sharing expertise. And so I don't really ask the students to work on a committee, though I do ask them to work in different groups throughout the semester with different students. But they also get experience sharing their expertise, right? And they get experience giving this expertise to different types of audiences. So again, not instructors, not peers, but in this case, it's going to be elementary school students and their families. And another part of service learning could be advocacy. So raising awareness about science, sharing enthusiasm about science, and just showing the possibilities. All right. So I've focused my course to really blend academic service with community service. And so I had 9 students enrolled. This is for the spring of 2025. And what I had them do is for their community service is I had them create and perform outreach. And so I shared a couple of examples going to the middle school, going to the science night. We also invite students, high school students, to come in and do some lab experiments with us. We go to other classrooms and talk about where microbes are. And we have one that's microbe hunters, where the students, this is for elementary students, but they put on lab coats, they put on their goggles, they get a swab, and they need to go somewhere in the classroom, swab it, and then we grow the microbes and we talk about where do microbes grow. So they will come up with these ideas, reach out to our community partners, go and do this, and then they'll take their activity and they'll share it with the other 400G students, and they'll practice peer reviewing that material. Once they work together as a class to peer review that material, then we publish that material and we put it into Merlot. And so far, since I've started this, we now have 5 different activities that we've put into the Merlot repository. These haven't been peer reviewed by Merlot folks yet, but they were peer reviewed by the 400G students. Now, the second part of this is the peer review process. And so what I've done, and to help these students with more of their academic service, is I chose 9 different Merlot materials. So I curated these. I went through that super long list of biology-based materials that Merlot has deemed high quality, and yet not had anybody had time to go through and peer review. And what I did is I had each student peer review 2 of those. They used the Merlot rubric, and then I went through their reviews, graded them, gave them feedback, and they were able to do this twice during the semester. At the end of that, I would compile these reviews, so it was a composite review, and then I could put the review onto Merlot, and that review, though, was under my name, under Merlot. And so this is how I've come up with this class to honor both community service and academic service while still helping the students build their CVs. And so the teal or the green boxes that I'm circling, these are all things that they can put on their CVs. So these are bullet points on their CVs that they get to say, I have been involved in this process, I have developed these skills, these are transferable, and they can track that. Now, if we just focus on how I'm training those undergraduates to actually do the peer review, they maybe had experience doing this in other classes, but not to a very rigorous standard, I would say. And so what I did was I gave them an exemplar. I showed them material that I had peer reviewed for Merlot. I showed them how I completed the rubric. So they had those exemplars ready to go. And then we had a bunch of in-class discussions, at least maybe 3 meetings, and we'd spend 20 minutes talking about discussions of peer review. What are your questions? How do you approach it? After that, I gave them a list of curated materials. When I was looking through, again, there's a long list of materials to peer review on Merlot, but I had to make sure that they were still accessible. Some of the things, I mean, if it's housed on Google or it's a website that's not maintained, sometimes the links don't work anymore, even though at one point they were high quality materials. And then I had to make sure that the knowledge was the content level was appropriate for the students. And so I would choose sometimes advanced microbiology materials that they could look at, and that might have been a YouTube video or that might have been a short article. I think that was kind of the crux of it, were articles and YouTube videos. And so if it was more advanced microbiology, I would assign that. Or if it was not microbiology, just more under the biology umbrella, if it was basic biology, then I could assign that too and expect them to have the expertise to be able to go through that. Each of these materials was independently peer reviewed by two separate students. So we would have student one, student two. They would both review the same material, and then they would both submit an independent review of that material to me. I would grade that. I compiled their reviews. I peer reviewed it. And then I was able to put that composite review to Merlot so that the materials were now had an extra peer review associated with them. I gave them blank copies of the Merlot rubric. I told them to plan 4 hours per review. I will say in retrospect, that was not the right amount of time. It was hard for me to know how fast they could do this, but that's okay. They gave me that feedback pretty fast. And then they also had a due date. So this wasn't something that they could just wait until the end of the semester. I had an earlier due date, and then maybe 3/4 the way through the semester, their second one was due. So I didn't want anybody to put it off to the end or not have sufficient time or bandwidth to work on this. Now, one more thing that I wish I would have done, and this is what I will implement when I move forward with this in the spring, is I really wish I would have had the students talk to the other person who reviewed the article. I wish I would have had them compare and have a little bit of in-class discussion time just to sit down with somebody who peer reviewed the same thing and kind of compare. I think that would have been powerful, and I will do that when I teach this course again. So that is how I set it up. And I was very curious about how, excuse me, I was very curious about the students' input on this and what their perspectives were after joining this process. And so I gave them a survey after they completed their second peer review. And I think I shared that in the chat. And Chelsea will be sending out my slides. So that link should work. And you can have access to the survey that I used. The survey, I did go through IRB. I do have approval to do this. It was completed during class time. And again, I had 9 participants this spring. I anticipate somewhat similar numbers. I'm sorry, I had 9 participants last spring, and I anticipate that I'll be able to have similar numbers this spring as well. So here's the student perspectives. These questions used a Likert scale. So 5 is strongly agree and 1 is strongly disagree. And then they just answered these questions using that scale. Again, there's only 9 responses, so I don't have a big cohort quite yet, but I do plan to keep collecting this research. And so the first question that I asked was, the OER review assignment helped me apply and deepen my expertise to the field. This was mostly agree. I will say that in the comments and when people had to expand a little bit further on their thoughts on this survey, they didn't realize what an OER review assignment was. And so again, this is something that I wish I would have brought up earlier in the class. And as I make changes to how I approach this, this is something that I will discuss earlier, is what are you doing? You are peer reviewing, but why? Well, because these are materials that are open for educators, and we want everybody to be able to use them and realize that they are high quality, use them with confidence. I gained experience in giving construction and professional feedback. Most people agreed with that. They also agreed that they better understand principles of open pedagogy, such as accessibility and adaptability. That was a strong agreement. And then they also believe these skills, like their peer review, content evaluation, critical thinking, are transferable to my future academic or professional work. And they did agree that this was useful for their future selves or whatever, if they were going to go to continue on in their schooling or if they were going to apply to a job, they felt like this assignment was going to help them, which I thought was one of the goals. And then I also asked them about the rubric. And so with the rubric, I'm just going to point out now that the standard deviation is higher here. So that just means that I had much broader numbers that people were picking on their Likert scale. So the rubric provided clear expectations for the review. The rubric helped me understand what quality feedback looks like. The rubric supported my learning and development through the assignment. For the most part, they agreed with this, but again, the standard deviation was a little bit higher. I think the rubric was a little bit tough to use, and I do remember feeling that when I first started using the Merlot rubric as well. It's a little overwhelming until you get used to it. So based on this, based on student comments, I think I would offer a modified version of the Merlot rubric to make it a little bit more straightforward for the students. I don't want to modify it too much because I want to honor that they are what the expectations that Merlot expect, or the expectations that Merlot has set forth when people are peer reviewing. So I can't modify it a lot, but I do think there's areas where I could clarify it. I also asked them open-ended questions on this survey and then did thematic analysis on their responses. And so with the question, what skills did you develop or strengthen through this assignment? They talked about constructive feedback and communication, which I think are really important skills no matter where you're going in life. They talked about pedagogical and educator skills, peer review and evaluation, and these were all had a positive association with them. There was a little bit of uncertainty about the skills that they were developing, but I think with this comment, it was more self-reflective on the student as being scared that they're not an expert. Who are they to give their opinion? And they brought this up to me in class, and I said, well, welcome to the club. That's how we all feel all the time, right? It's imposter syndrome. But it's a reminder for them about how far they have come in their degree, and a reminder that they do know a lot and they can give back in this way. Some of the quotes from this, especially with those broader academic skills, that they know more about peer review, accessibility, proofreading, how to cite properly. So I think this student liked having the rubric and looking and saying, okay, is this article cited correctly? Now I can like go through and look at it. And then they also like that they were forced to look at different aspects like technical requirements. And so I think unless students really need to worry about accessibility, I think they don't, right? And so having to look at a resource and kind of judge it for if are there captions on the video, is it accessible to other formats, right? I think that that helped push them a little bit. I also asked them how this experience compares to other academic assignments. And with this one, I was really trying to get into the nuance of, are you realizing that this is a renewable assignment? Are you realizing that this is something that's going to live on beyond you being in college, rather than, oh, peer review your partner's work and then nobody's ever going to look at it again? And so I think students picked up on this. They liked that it was open-ended and creative. They liked that it was novel. Again, several mentioned real world skill development. They had positive outlooks for feedback and peer interactions. And where they had mixed reactions was the workload. And again, this goes back to the 4 hours. 4 hours was too much. I didn't realize that at the time, but I will have different recommendations moving forward. And so some other quotes are listed here. This process taught important skills for students entering research or industry, or learning about my teaching style and how to peer review others was helpful. So it did and help them with a little bit of self-reflection as well. I did ask them about how the rubric or the review process could be improved as well. The time, again, 4 hours, too much. So I took that feedback to heart. They did like how they got to collaborate a little bit for this. And again, in the future, I think I'm going to encourage them to really collaborate together and compare their peer reviews before they submit it as an official assignment. The rubric clarity, the accessibility of the rubric, it's tough to use at first. So I think I will help with that in the future. They did like being part of this process. They did get that this is a valuable service that people provide in academia. I think they really liked that. And then there was mixed reviews for the usefulness of the examples and the materials that I chose. And quotes were, there should be an index or something that explains what each box in the rubric means. So I think more practice with the rubric or clarification is important. And then having another rubric with the class requirements could be helpful as well. So it's just kind of their feedback for the process. And then I asked if they feel more confident contributing to professional or public facing academic work, and why or why not. And this made me feel really good that they are feeling confident with their skills, because most of this was positive, where they had increased confidence as they practiced this, understanding of quality and expectations, development of their feedback skills, or confidence linked to their subject familiarity. This is all things that you build upon as you build your expertise. And so I think this is a good way to show them that they have come a long way in their academic journey. They are, they're not professors yet, but they do know a lot, and they should be be acknowledged for how much they do know. Some of their quotes: I feel like I know what to look for and give good in-depth feedback, and practice peer reviewing work and being able to take feedback and apply it. So again, these are skills that they can apply wherever they're going to go. So with this, and I've mentioned some of the modifications that I do plan on making, slight modifications to that Merlot rubric. I think it's a little bit daunting when they first started to use it. I do want them to work as partners, at least comparing their first set of reviews and probably comparing their second set of reviews. I think that will improve their confidence in the whole process too, and also show them where they might have missed something, rather than me coming along as the grader and taking away points because they missed something that they didn't know to look for. I think I do need to introduce open pedagogy and OER a little bit earlier, rather than just saying we're reviewing OER. Just take a step back and explain what that means and put it into the context of what we're doing. Provide more in-class time for discussion. Provide more specific feedback for them as well. One of the students asked for a rubric for how they use the rubric, which is kind of mind-bending, but I could do that, and they might find that helpful. And again, more discussion time spent on review. And future directions. I think what would be another really good use, and how students could really be helpful in open pedagogy and really making a renewable assignment and ensuring that somebody else is going to keep using this material, is asking them not only to serve as peer reviewers, but also serve as editors. And this is still something that's kind of percolating in my brain, but I want to incorporate this at some point in this process as well. Yes, and with that, I'd be happy to take any of your questions, or I'd also love your feedback or any ideas you have for how students could be more involved in this process.
If you have a question, feel free to unmute or add it to the chat. I'll kick us off then. Medora, for anyone who's attending today or listening on the recording, what would be your number one tip if they want to integrate OER peer review into their classroom with their students, if it's not like the same exact kind of capstone course as yours?
Right. I think you could do it with lots of courses. You just have to find the specific material for them to peer review, right? And so that's where it gets tricky. And I like working with Merlot because I know they have that option to peer review, and they have the list of material that somebody else has already triaged and said this is high quality. So I think either getting involved with Merlot or figuring out another repository that you feel confident the material is high quality and that could use peer review. Because I think, because you could take just something from like Wikipedia and have your students do that. It's hard to know, right? Because it's more crowd control than it is like a standard peer review. So I think figuring out how you can make it standardized is important.
Yeah, totally fair. That is a great tip, and just shows that it can be applied in any classroom. Um, do any attendees have a question? Okay. Medora, is there anything else you want to share to conclude the presentation? If we don't have any present questions. Of course, if something pops up later, I think you are definitely willing to be reached out to.
Yes, definitely. Email me with any questions you have, or I'm also open to ideas. This is what I've worked out so far, but I'm always tweaking, always updating. So I would love your ideas or to brainstorm with you at any point. And I appreciate your attention, and I'm glad that you're here today.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar.